She's never smiled like that before.
I know, it's incredible.
Yeah.
On Christmas Eve, CEO Alexandra stepped into the restaurant ablaze with golden light, leading Matilda by the hand. Her 8-year-old daughter clutched a stuffed bear like a life raft. Around them, investors laughed loud enough to shake the chandeliers, but Matilda only watched their mouths move, the words meaningless shapes. Alexandra bent down to offer comfort, then was pulled away by a handshake. When she turned back, the chair beside her was empty. A man in a maintenance uniform knelt before Matilda, his hands moving slow and deliberate. Matilda suddenly laughed, a sound that stopped Alexandra's heart. Alexandra was the CEO of a tech finance conglomerate, standing at a crossroads. Tonight's investment dinner would decide everything. If the deal closed, she kept control of her company. If it failed, the board would force her out, perhaps replace her entirely. She had built this empire with steel precision, navigating boardrooms where weakness was blood in the water. But there was one vulnerability she could never quite hide. Matilda Alexandra loved her daughter with a fierce, protective intensity that sometimes felt like its own kind of failure. Because love, she had learned, was not the same as understanding. She had hired the best therapists, bought the most advanced hearing aids, scheduled every appointment with military efficiency. She ran motherhood like a project, checking boxes, meeting benchmarks. But there was one thing all her competence could not buy. She had never learned her daughter's language. Matilda had been deaf since birth, navigating a world that spoke in frequencies she could not hear. At 8 years old, she had learned to read the world through sight. She watched lips form words she had to decode. She saw the way people's eyes slid past her, uncomfortable with difference. She noticed when her mother's attention was always divided, always elsewhere, always on the next crisis. Matilda was bright, sensitive, and deeply aware that she made her mother's life complicated. In rooms full of important people, she knew she was the problem that did not fit the script. So she learned to make herself small, to fade into corners, to hold her stuffed bear and wait for moments to pass. Tonight, Alexandra needed Matilda to be perfect, quiet, invisible if possible. Henry was 40 years old, a contract maintenance worker who had been called to the restaurant to handle electrical and sound system issues on the busiest night of the year. He moved through the world with the quiet confidence of someone who had stopped trying to impress anyone. His work uniform was clean but worn. His tool belt familiar weighed on his hip. He was good with his hands, good at fixing things that broke in ways most people never noticed. He had brought his son because the daycare was closed for the holiday. Finn, 10 years old, sat on an equipment crate in the back hallway, coloring a Christmas picture while his father worked. The boy was mature beyond his years, shaped by the absence of a mother and the presence of a father who showed love through presence, not presents. What set Henry apart tonight, what made him different from every other person in that glittering restaurant, was simple. He knew sign language, not the performative kind learned from a weekend class, but the fluent lived-in kind that came from necessity, the kind that meant family. Finn knew it too. For father and son, signing was as natural as breathing. A language born from a time when words had failed them, and hands had to speak instead. The restaurant was dressed for Christmas, like a stage set for privilege. A towering tree sparkled near the entrance, its ornaments catching light from crystal chandeliers. Garland wound around railings, and soft instrumental versions of carols played just loud enough to seem elegant. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, snow fell on the Manhattan street outside, muffling the city into something almost peaceful. Alexandra entered with Matilda, both dressed for the occasion. Matilda wore a velvet dress and held her bear, but her expression was the blank one she wore when overwhelmed. Alexandra squeezed her daughter's hand, trying to offer reassurance, while her own pulse hammered with pre-negotiation anxiety. Hillary, the company's head of public relations, materialized beside them with the smooth efficiency of someone orchestrating a performance. She leaned close to Alexandra's ear, voice low and urgent. Tonight is about the script. Smiles, confidence, control. After 15 minutes of greeting the investors, we can move Matilda to a private room. She'll be more comfortable, and we avoid any disruptions. The words were framed as consideration, but Alexandra heard the subtext. Matilda was a risk, a variable that could not be controlled, something to be managed. Corbin arrived next, a senior board member whose silver hair and tailored suit gave him the appearance of distinguished authority. But Alexandra had learned to read the calculation behind his polite smile. He glanced at Matilda, then back to Alexandra. Tonight is crucial. We need to project stability. Unity. No surprises. It was not quite a threat, but it was not quite not a threat either. Alexandra nodded, feeling the familiar tightness in her chest, the feeling of being squeezed between what she wanted to do and what she had to do. The VIP table was positioned near the windows, the best view in the house. Investors were already gathering, men and women who held the power to make or break companies with a single decision. Leon, the key investor, was a man in his 60s with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. He did not suffer fools, and he did not invest in weakness. Matilda was seated beside her mother, but the chair felt too large, the table too high. Around her, adults spoke rapidly, laughed explosively, raised glasses and toasts. She could feel the vibrations of their voices through the table, but the words themselves were lost. Her hearing aids picked up a jumbled mess of background noise, all of it too loud and none of it making sense. She looked at her mother. Alexandra was smiling, nodding, shaking hands, but her eyes never quite landed on Matilda. Not really. Not in the way that meant "I see you." An investor arrived and Alexandra stood to greet him, leaving Matilda alone in a sea of incomprehensible noise. The child's fingers tightened on her bear. Matilda had learned that when the world became too much, the solution was to find somewhere quieter, somewhere smaller. So when no one was looking, when all the adults were busy performing their important adult rituals, she slipped from her chair and walked toward the back of the restaurant. The hallway near the kitchen was dimmer, less decorated. Service staff moved past with hurried efficiency, but none of them stopped to question a well-dressed child. Matilda found a spot near a door marked maintenance and stood there holding her bear, letting the relative quiet settle her racing heart. That was when Henry saw her. He had been checking a circuit panel when he noticed the small figure standing uncertainly in the service corridor. She was clearly not supposed to be there, but she did not look lost. She looked like someone who had chosen exile over chaos. Henry approached slowly, making sure she could see him coming. He knew the rules about approaching someone else's child, knew the boundaries of his position as a maintenance worker in a place like this, but he also knew what it looked like when someone was drowning in plain sight. He knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. He did not speak, did not ask questions that would require her to explain herself to a stranger. Instead, he placed his hand over his heart and signed a simple greeting. "Hello." Matilda's eyes went wide. She stared at his hands like they were a miracle. For the first time all night, someone was speaking her language. She signed back, tentative at first, her small hands fumbling through the shapes. Then, more confidently as Henry responded, his movements patient and clear. Finn noticed from his spot on the equipment crate. He hopped down and joined his father, signing to Matilda with the casual ease of a child who had never known signing to be anything but normal. He asked if she liked the Christmas tree, if she wanted candy canes, simple questions asked with simple kindness. Matilda laughed. It was not a loud laugh, but in the relative quiet of the hallway, it was bright and clear and unguarded. The kind of laugh that only happens when someone feels safe. Alexandra had turned back to find her daughter, and instead found her gone. Panic spiked through her professional composure. She scanned the dining room, then the entry, then finally caught sight of Matilda at the far end of a hallway with a strange man. Alexandra walked toward them, her heels clicking on polished floors, her CO mask firmly in place. But as she got closer, she saw something that stopped her cold. Matilda was smiling, not the polite, careful smile she gave to cameras and strangers, but a real smile, the kind that crinkled her eyes and made her look like the child she was. And Alexandra, her mother, the person who was supposed to know her best, had no idea what they were saying. She stood just out of sight, watching her daughter communicate in a language she had never bothered to truly learn. Henry's hands moved with grace and precision, each gesture deliberate and clear. Finn signed with the rapid energy of youth, making Matilda giggle, and Alexandra realized with a clarity that felt like breaking that she had been so busy managing her daughter's disability that she had forgotten to meet her daughter where she was. She thought of all the boardroom negotiations she had mastered, all the complex deals she had navigated, all the people she had learned to read and predict and outmaneuver. But she could not read her own child's hands. Henry noticed Alexandra watching. He caught her eye and signed something slow and clear, instinctively knowing she would not understand. His expression was kind but honest. "She's okay. She just needed space." Alexandra guessed at the meaning from context and expression, but the not knowing gnawed at her. This was what Matilda felt all the time. She realized this constant work of translation, of guessing, of being outside the language everyone else took for granted. Hilary appeared, pulling Alexandra by the elbow. Her voice was low and urgent. "Leon is waiting. We cannot let personal matters derail this deal. Come back to the table." For years, Alexandra had obeyed that logic. Business first, stability first, control first. But tonight something in her resisted. "Wait," she said. "Just one word." But it felt like breaking a chain. She looked back at Matilda, who was still talking with Henry and Finn. Her hands animated and her expression open. This was her daughter. Not a problem to be solved, not a risk to be managed. Her daughter. The interruption came from Otis, the restaurant manager, who approached Henry with barely concealed irritation. He had been watching the interaction from a distance, worried about protocol breaches and VIP complaints. "You need to return to your work," Otis said quietly but firmly. "This is not appropriate." Henry stood slowly, his demeanor calm. The child seemed overwhelmed. "I was just making sure she was all right." "That's not your job. Please go back to the maintenance area." Before Henry could respond, Corbin appeared, drawn by the commotion. His gaze swept over the scene, taking in Henry's work uniform, Matilda's presence, and Alexandra standing nearby. "Is there a problem here?" Corbin's voice was smooth, but his eyes were cold. "Why is a maintenance worker interacting with the CEO's daughter?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Several nearby guests turned to look, sensing drama. Hilary seized the moment, whispering to Alexandra, "If anyone takes a photo, if this becomes a story, it will look terrible. A strange man with your daughter at a business dinner." Alexandra felt the vice tightening. On one side, the deal with Leon, her reputation, her control of the company. On the other, Matilda's first genuine smile all evening. She made her choice. Alexandra stepped. She looked like someone who had chosen exile over chaos. Henry approached slowly, making sure she could see him coming. He knew the rules about approaching someone else's child, knew the boundaries of his position as a maintenance worker in a place like this, but he also knew what it looked like when someone was drowning in plain sight. He knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. He did not speak, did not ask questions that would require her to explain herself to a stranger. Instead, he placed his hand over his heart and signed a simple greeting. "Hello." Matilda's eyes went wide. She stared at his hands like they were a miracle. For the first time all night, someone was speaking her language. She signed back, tentative at first, her small hands fumbling through the shapes. Then more confidently as Henry responded, his movements patient and clear. Finn noticed from his spot on the equipment crate. He hopped down and joined his father, signing to Matilda with the casual ease of a child who had never known signing to be anything but normal. He asked if she liked the Christmas tree, if she wanted candy canes, simple questions asked with simple kindness. Matilda laughed. It was not a loud laugh, but in the relative quiet of the hallway, it was bright and clear and unguarded. The kind of laugh that only happens when someone feels safe. Alexandra had turned back to find her daughter, and instead found her gone. Panic spiked through her professional composure. She scanned the dining room, then the entry, then finally caught sight of Matilda at the far end of a hallway with a strange man. Alexandra walked toward them, her heels clicking on polished floors, her CO mask firmly in place. But as she got closer, she saw something that stopped her cold. Matilda was smiling, not the polite, careful smile she gave to cameras and strangers, but a real smile, the kind that crinkled her eyes and made her look like the child she was. And Alexandra, her mother, the person who was supposed to know her best, had no idea what they were saying. She stood just out of sight, watching her daughter communicate in a language she had never bothered to truly learn. Henry's hands moved with grace and precision, each gesture deliberate and clear. Finn signed with the rapid energy of youth, making Matilda giggle, and Alexandra realized with a clarity that felt like breaking that she had been so busy managing her daughter's disability that she had forgotten to meet her daughter where she was. She thought of all the boardroom negotiations she had mastered, all the complex deals she had navigated, all the people she had learned to read and predict and outmaneuver. But she could not read her own child's hands. Henry noticed Alexandra watching. He caught her eye and signed something slow and clear, instinctively knowing she would not understand. His expression was kind but honest. She's okay. She just needed space. Alexandra guessed at the meaning from context and expression, but the not knowing gnawed at her. This was what Matilda felt all the time. She realized this constant work of translation, of guessing, of being outside the language everyone else took for granted. Hilary appeared, pulling Alexandra by the elbow. Her voice was low and urgent. "Leon is waiting. We cannot let personal matters derail this deal. Come back to the table." For years, Alexandra had obeyed that logic. Business first, stability first, control first. But tonight something in her resisted. "Wait," she said. Just one word. But it felt like breaking a chain. She looked back at Matilda, who was still talking with Henry and Finn. Her hands animated and her expression open. This was her daughter. Not a problem to be solved, not a risk to be managed. Her daughter. The interruption came from Otis, the restaurant manager, who approached Henry with barely concealed irritation. He had been watching the interaction from a distance, worried about protocol breaches and VIP complaints. "You need to return to your work," Otis said quietly, but firmly. "This is not appropriate." Henry stood slowly, his demeanor calm. The child seemed overwhelmed. "I was just making sure she was all right." "That's not your job. Please go back to the maintenance area." Before Henry could respond, Corbin appeared, drawn by the commotion. His gaze swept over the scene, taking in Henry's work uniform, Matilda's presence, and Alexandra standing nearby. "Is there a problem here?" Corbin's voice was smooth, but his eyes were cold. "Why is a maintenance worker interacting with the CEO's daughter?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Several nearby guests turned to look, sensing drama. Hilary seized the moment, whispering to Alexandra, "If anyone takes a photo, if this becomes a story, it will look terrible. A strange man with your daughter at a business dinner." Alexandra felt the vice tightening. On one side, the deal with Leon, her reputation, her control of the company. On the other, Matilda's first genuine smile all evening. She made her choice. Alexandra stepped shallow. Alexandra froze, not knowing what to do beyond pulling her daughter close. But proximity did not stop the noise, did not fix the problem. Henry was already moving. He did not ask permission from Otis or anyone else. He simply went to work, Finn trailing behind with a flashlight and work gloves. In the back utility room, Henry opened the electrical panel and immediately saw the problem. Someone had tampered with the connections. This was not wear and tear or accidental damage. Someone had deliberately loosened critical wires just enough to cause failure under load. He saw fingerprints in dust on the panel, handprints that did not match the pattern of normal maintenance access. Working quickly, Henry bypassed the damaged connections, replaced a blown fuse, and isolated the feedback loop, causing the speaker interference. Within minutes, the light stabilized and the sound system came back online. He returned to find Matilda still shaken but calmer. He knelt down and signed to her. "All fixed. You're safe now." Matilda, without thinking, reached out and briefly held his hand. The child's instinctive thank you to the adult who had made the fear stop. Alexandra watched the gesture and felt something crack inside her chest. This stranger understood her daughter better than she did. As the dinner resumed, Alexandra made a decision. She quietly asked a server to set up a smaller table in a quieter corner of the restaurant near the windows, but away from the main VIP section. Then she walked to Leon and asked for 10 minutes. "Something more important than our deal?" Leon asked, his tone skeptical. "Something that will show you who I actually am, not who I'm pretending to be," Alexandra replied. Leon, intrigued despite himself, nodded. Alexandra led Matilda to the smaller table. Then, in a move that shocked everyone watching, she approached Henry. "Would you and your son join us?" "Just for 10 minutes, if you're willing," Henry hesitated, glancing down at his work clothes at the VIP section full of people in evening wear. "I'm not sure that's appropriate, ma'am." But Matilda was already signing to him, asking him to stay. Finn was nodding enthusiastically, and Alexandra, for the first time all night, looked like she was asking for something she actually wanted, not something she had scripted. Henry agreed. The four of them sat at the small table by the window. Outside, snow continued to fall, turning the city into something softer, quieter. Inside, for the first time that evening, Matilda relaxed. Finn started telling stories with his hands, talking about how he and his father decorated their small Christmas tree, how they made paper snowflakes and strung popcorn. He signed about Santa and reindeer, and the cookies they always baked on Christmas Eve. Matilda responded in sign, her movements growing more animated, more confident. She told them about her bear, about her school, about the things she loved but rarely got to share because so few people could understand. Alexandra tried to follow along, tried to join in. Her signing was clumsy, unpracticed. She made mistakes that Matilda gently corrected. At one point, Alexandra signed something backwards, and Matilda actually laughed, not cruelly, but with the patience of a child teaching an adult. The sound of that laughter, that forgiveness, nearly broke Alexandra. Henry explained why he knew sign language. He told them about Finn's accident years ago, a fall that had damaged his hearing for months. During that time, sign language had been their only reliable way to communicate. Henry had learned it in hospital waiting rooms and from YouTube videos at 2 o'clock in the morning, desperate to reach his son across the silence that had fallen between them. There were nights, Henry said, speaking aloud while his hands moved for Matilda's benefit, when the only thing holding us together was the fact that I could tell him I loved him, even if he couldn't hear it. Hands can say things that voices sometimes can't. Alexandra looked at Henry's hands, scarred and oil-stained from years of manual labor. Hands that had learned tenderness out of necessity. Hands that had built a bridge to his son when everything else had failed. Then Matilda did something small but profound. She placed her stuffed bear in Alexandra's lap, a gesture of trust, of invitation, of offering her mother a chance to step into her world. Alexandra understood. She held the bear carefully like it was made of glass. When Alexandra returned to the main table, Corbin had already set his trap. Another crisis had emerged. A critical USB drive containing financial documents needed for the presentation had gone missing. Security was being called. The VIP area was in controlled chaos. Hillary, whether intentionally or not, directed suspicion toward the back areas. Someone from the maintenance crew was accessing the technical systems. Perhaps we should check if anything else went missing. Eyes turned toward the hallway where Henry had been working. George, the head of security, approached Henry with apologetic but firm professionalism. "Sir, I need to check your equipment bag. It's just protocol." Finn stepped in front of his father, protective and afraid. Matilda watched from across the room, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her breathing quickening. Alexandra stood. "Stop. He just saved this dinner. He did nothing wrong, but Leon and the other investors were watching, and the optics were terrible." George had no choice but to proceed with the check, even though it humiliated Henry in front of everyone. Otis offered apologies to the VIP guests, but the apologies themselves became an indictment, painting Henry as the problem that needed managing. Finn's eyes filled with tears. He held his father's hand tightly, trying to be brave. Matilda could not stand it. She stood up and walked into the center of the room. In front of all the investors, all the board members, all the people who had spent the evening pretending she did not exist, she signed. Her hands moved clearly, precisely, forming words that most people in the room could not understand. "He's good. He helped me. He's my friend." But the investors did not know sign language. They saw a child making gestures they could not interpret, and their discomfort grew. Alexandra felt rage and shame burning in her throat. Rage at herself for not understanding her own daughter. Shame that Matilda was speaking and no one could hear. She knelt beside Matilda and signed back haltingly, imperfectly. "I'm sorry. I should have learned this years ago." Then Alexandra turned to Corbin, and in his eyes she saw something that confirmed her growing suspicion. He looked satisfied. Not concerned, satisfied. Henry's mind was working through the problem. The electrical panel had been tampered with deliberately. Right before the dinner, now a critical USB drive was missing at the exact moment when attention was focused on him. It was too coordinated, too convenient. He remembered where he had seen Corbin before years ago on a construction project, where Henry had been blamed for faulty wiring that turned out to be sabotage. The case had been dropped, but Henry had lost that contract and Corbin had been there in the background, part of the client team. Henry did not have proof, but he had instinct. And right now, his instinct was screaming. Alexandra decided to take control in the only way she knew how. She stood before Leon and the assembled investors and made a declaration. If you're investing in me, you deserve to see who I am when I'm not performing. You deserve to see me make a choice. Leon raised an eyebrow. And what choice is that? To stop pretending my daughter is a problem to be hidden, to defend a good man who's being scapegoated, and to find out who's actually responsible for tonight's disruptions. It was a gamble. It could cost her everything. But for the first time in years, Alexandra felt like herself. Henry stepped forward. "Sir," he said to George, "before you finish searching my bag, could we check the security camera footage from the hallway 30 minutes ago when the system went down?" Otis hesitated. Leon intervened. "Show the footage." Reluctantly, Otis accessed the security system on a tablet. The footage showed the service hallway clearly. A person in a server's uniform entered the maintenance area before Henry arrived. The person's movements were furtive, deliberate. They accessed the electrical panel, made adjustments, then left. Moments later, the same person appeared near the VIP section, close to where coats and bags were stored. The build, the walk, the mannerisms matched someone at the table. Hillary's face went pale as she recognized the figure. It was someone she had hired to help stage manage the evening's events. Corbin began to speak, trying to redirect. "This is a restaurant staff issue. It has nothing to do with the investment discussion," but Henry was not finished. "That person didn't just tamper with the electrical system. They also went near the coat check area. Right around the time the USB drive disappeared, Finn had been paying attention, his sharp eyes noticing details adults missed. He signed to Matilda, who signed back to Henry, who spoke aloud to Alexandra. Your son says he saw Corbin touch a coat pocket near your chair about 15 minutes ago." George checked the coat area. In the pocket of a jacket belonging to one of Corbin's associates, he found the USB drive. The room went silent. Corbin's expression remained controlled, but Alexandra saw the calculation behind his eyes. He was deciding whether to deny or deflect or retreat. Leon did not. Invest in. After the dinner, consequences unfolded with swift precision. Corbin was suspended from the board, pending a full investigation into corporate misconduct. Hillary was terminated, her carefully crafted career dismantled by her own choice to enable sabotage. Alexandra did not hide what had happened. She released a statement acknowledging the attempted coup and her own failures as a mother who had prioritized image over connection. More importantly, she enrolled in sign language classes, not the weekend crash course kind, the real kind, the committed kind. She practiced every morning before work and every evening after. Her hands would never be as fluent as Henry's or Finn's, but they would be honest. She established a foundation to support deaf and hard of hearing children, but she was careful not to make Matilda the face of it. Her daughter was not a mascot. She was a child. Henry received a formal apology from Otis and the restaurant management. They offered him a long-term contract with better pay and flexible hours. But what mattered more to Henry was that it was not charity. It was recognition of his skill and his character. Alexandra offered Henry a position as accessibility consultant for her company, helping to create systems and spaces that worked for everyone. The hours were flexible, the pay was fair, and most importantly, it was built on mutual respect, not gratitude or pity. 2 weeks after Christmas, Alexandra invited Henry and Finn to a small gathering at her home. Not a business dinner, just dinner. The four of them sat in Alexandra's living room, which was simpler and warmer than the sterile elegance of the restaurant. A modest Christmas tree stood by the window, decorated with a mix of expensive ornaments and handmade paper snowflakes that Matilda and Finn had created together. Matilda reached up and hung a new ornament on the tree, one she had made herself. It was a simple design, 2 hands reaching toward each other, fingers almost touching. Alexandra knelt beside her daughter and signed slowly but clearly. "I love you." Matilda signed back, then reached for Henry and Finn, pulling them into a circle. The 4 of them stood together, and Matilda taught them all a single sign. One word that carried the weight of everything that had happened, everything that had changed. Family. Their hands moved in unison, speaking a language that needed no sound, only presence, only connection, only the willingness to learn how to reach across silence and find each other. Outside, snow continued to fall on the city, covering everything in clean white. Inside, in the warm glow of Christmas lights, for people who had been strangers weeks ago, discovered what it meant to truly see one another. Not through the lens of power or position or performance, but through the simple, profound act of learning to speak each other's language. Matilda's bear sat on the mantel, watching over them, a symbol of what she had needed for so long. Safety, understanding, home. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, Alexandra was not thinking about the next meeting, the next crisis, the next move in the chess game of corporate power. She was thinking about how her daughter's hands looked when she laughed, how Finn's eyes lit up when he told stories, how Henry's patience had built a bridge where Alexandra's competence had failed. She was thinking that sometimes the most important language was the one you had to learn from scratch. The one that required you to slow down, to be humble, to admit you did not know everything. The one that was spoken not with authority, but with love. As they sat down to dinner, Matilda signed a question to her mother. Alexandra did not understand every word, but she understood enough. "Are you happy?" Alexandra signed back, her movements still clumsy, but her meaning clear. "Yes, I'm learning." Matilda smiled, the same bright, unguarded smile she had given Henry in that hallway weeks ago. The smile that had changed everything. And in that smile, Alexandra saw what she had been missing all along. Not a daughter who needed to be managed, but a daughter who simply needed to be seen. The conversation flowed in two languages, spoken and signed, sometimes overlapping, sometimes separate. It was not perfect. There were misunderstandings and corrections and moments of confusion, but it was real, and real, Alexandra was learning, was worth more than perfect ever could be. As the evening wound down and Finn started to yawn, Henry prepared to leave. At the door, he turned to Alexandra. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" Alexandra asked. "For letting me help. A lot of people in your position wouldn't have." Alexandra shook her head. "You helped my daughter when I couldn't. I'm the one who should be thanking you." Henry smiled. The quiet smile of someone who understood that some gifts could not be repaid, only passed forward. After they left, Alexandra sat with Matilda on the couch, the Christmas tree lights glowing softly. Matilda curled against her mother, the stuffed bear tucked between them. Alexandra signed to her daughter in the dim light, practicing the phrases she had learned that week. "I see you. I hear you. Even when you're silent, I'm listening." Matilda's eyes drifted closed, peaceful and safe. For 8 years, Alexandra had been trying to bring Matilda into her world. The world of board meetings and quarterly reports and carefully managed images. But tonight she understood that she had been doing it backwards. The real work, the important work, was learning to enter Matilda's world, to meet her daughter where she was in the language she spoke, in the silence that was not really silence at all. It was a world where hands could say, "I love you," where understanding was more valuable than words, where connection did not require sound, only presence. And as snow fell outside and the city settled into its Christmas Eve quiet, Alexandra made a promise to herself and to her daughter. She would learn this language, not just the signs, but the patience behind them, the listening, the seeing, the being fully present in a moment instead of always racing toward the next one. She would learn to be the mother Matilda needed, not the mother she thought she was supposed to be, and she would never again let anyone make her daughter feel like a secret that needed hiding. Matilda stirred in her sleep, her hand unconsciously signing a single word. "Home." Alexandra kissed her daughter's forehead and signed back, even though Matilda could not see. "Yes, baby, we're home." And for the first time in longer than she could remember, it was